Got to give Mellencamp a few minutes there. Good morning. It's so good to be with you. I wanted to walk in because I am a small town Indiana boy. Born and raised, and it's coming home for me, and I'm really glad to be with you all today, and really good to be with the speakers. It's going to be fun to hear from each of you. I'm going to learn a lot as well, so we're glad you showed up. It felt a little bit like Young Life Club as AC's out doing selfies and throwing t-shirts to people, so I'm feeling right at home right about now. Now, you know, I wanted to tell you that I'm born here in Indiana and raised here in Indiana because my roots are here, and I've lived in a bunch of small towns through my life. Born, raised, met Jesus, as Mellencamp says, in a small town. I've got a slide here I want to show you where I've been. Not only here in Indiana, but around the United States and even across the world in Japan, as you just heard. And I felt like this was a good metaphor to start off because I think leadership, mentorship, being in the lives of others is kind of like a journey. And what I'm going to do with you today is share some of my journey as a leader. These things for me are not theoretical. They're what God's been teaching me over my career, not only at Lilly and now at Young Life, but in many, many other ways. And I'm guessing that he's been doing that for you as well. And just a moment on Young Life. This is an organization of about 5,000 staff people in 102 countries. We've got about 75,000 volunteers who are out moving into the lives of kids, adolescents, ages 12 to 22. And we call those volunteers leaders because what they're doing is leading kids, mentoring kids, and emerging adults in a way that makes a difference in their lives and, in fact, changes the trajectory of their life. So, just a little bit of a plug there. In case you want to move to some younger mentoring ages, we'd love to have you join us. So, our topic is people-centered leadership. And, you know, as I think about people-centered leadership, at first I thought, well, that's kind of a little bit of a redundancy, isn't it? Because people are about leadership and leadership is about people. But it's often that we get that mixed up. It's very often that we get that mixed up. I think leaders are very important in setting direction and vision, aligning people to that vision, motivating and inspiring. It's all about that. But sometimes we get that mixed up with we're going to manage them, we're going to control them, we're going to get them to do exactly what we want. And I think that's a misnomer. And what I'd like to talk to you today about is really servanthood and how we focus in a different way. You know, it's been said that we're called to love people and use things, but we often get that backwards, don't we? And so today I think what I'd like to say is your most fundamental identity as a leader, as a mentor, is to be a servant of those who are in your life. And my leadership has been shaped by this through the years. But, you know, as we consider how to be a leader and a servant, I think what's most crucial is that reflection that we do. And what I'd like to do with you today is tell you a story. It's a modern-day story, a version of an ancient truth. And I'd like to give you a grid that you can begin to think and reflect on your own leadership, what it means to be a servant. And finally, with a charge to get real and give you that as an opportunity to reflect on. So I'd like to tell you this story. So listen to this, put your mind in it, and imagine maybe being in this group. So there's a group of talented recruits from top schools, other companies, and they enter into a training program at one of the top companies, hottest companies, privately held but readying for an IPO. Two of these new hires are actually brothers, real go-getters with a reputation for past success and real future promise. At the end of one of their training sessions, where their CEO and founder was teaching, two of these approach him and reveal their personal ambitions and desires to be his right and left-hand man. They tell the founder they want to rise up as quickly as possible. Well, you can imagine the other trainees in the room get a little indignant at this sort of shameless show of ambition. But firmly and with patience, the founder addresses these two hotshots whose self-focus was getting the best of them, and through them he addresses the other leaders in training who frankly might not have said anything, but were maybe thinking some of the same things themselves. He says to them, I'm not sure you know what you're asking for. Are you willing to invest the time required to sacrifice like I've sacrificed and many others in order to attain this position? They said, yeah, of course we are. We're going to sacrifice. We're going to commit. He says, yep, you're going to commit. But to make you my right and left-hand persons may not be mine to call, because as we ready ourselves for an IPO, we're going to be installing a new CEO, and that's what the board and I are working on. But let me share with you some of my deepest philosophy on leadership. We're not led like many other companies, he said. Modern corporations set up top-down hierarchies, which surprisingly look more like medieval aristocracies than they do a service-centered, customer-centric organization. And sadly and unknowingly, this causes the people in the organization to think that they're serving the leaders instead of serving the customers who buy and benefit from our products. Those leaders come to believe that power and authority are their only relevant modes of behavior and means by which they achieve results and stay in control. This is not the way at our company. We exist to serve our customers. We have been successful because we've served our customers, and in the future we will be successful because we serve our customers. And the only way I know to make that happen is to ensure that leadership serves our employees so that they in turn can serve those. It's not the reverse. The flow is simple. Leadership serves employees so that they can serve our customers. I see my role as CEO to serve each of you, to give everything I have, everything I am, to make you successful as leaders, so that in turn you can be servants of those in our organization. Your first identity as a leader should be as a servant. And if you want to go far in this company, you need to start and end there. Are you with me? Now, this story actually happened. The story actually did happen. It probably happens in some form or fashion in training rooms and in conference rooms and companies and organizations around the world today, but it actually did happen 2,000 years ago. The founder of this new movement was named Jesus of Nazareth. He was, too, kind of a small-town guy. The participants in the leadership training class were his 12 disciples, and the two brothers were James and John. And you can find it actually in Mark chapter 10 and Matthew chapter 20 in the New Testament. You really don't need to be a biblical scholar, a linguistic specialist, or even a religious person or believer to understand what Jesus is talking about when he speaks about authentic leadership and its distortions. And I'd like to read for you the last comments that he makes from the book of Mark. And so these are Mark 10, and it's verses 42 through 45. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. It's my belief that that story is as relevant today as it ever has been. Whether you're a follower of Jesus of Nazareth or not, it's hard to contest what most secular historians say, that he was the most influential person who ever walked the earth. What I'd like to do is begin a process here of digging deep and thinking about those tensions and paradoxes, the choices that we need to make in leadership that we find in those few verses, those few phrases that Jesus stated. And to do so, I'm going to actually build a 2x2 matrix, which is a pretty common way to think about managing polarity, thinking through tensions. It actually did not originate with the Boston Consulting Group. Rather, a guy named René Descartes, a French mathematician and philosopher, did. But, Mindy, you're in the audience, BCG certainly made it popular. So I want to draw this up for you on the screen here. And you think about the vertical axis, think about being a servant or servanthood, and then think about, as Jesus stated, wielding authority or wielding power users I'm calling it. And then think about the X or horizontal axis, going from self-focused over to other-focused. You may think for a moment that, well, those are just a few dimensions, but what I want to tell you is these are critical dimensions, and if you get these right, other things fall into place if you really want to be an authentic leader. And so let's go to quadrant one. Quadrant one I'll call authentic leadership, or servants who lead, making that servants the first identity that you have, whether you're a leader, whether you're a coach, you're a mentor, that you see yourself as one who's called to serve. What's important about authentic leadership is these are people who exhibit the courage and humility to do the right things for the right reasons. They invest in the mission of their organization, the why we exist. They deliver superior results over time. They prioritize the development of others. They get out of the way and let other people shine when they need to. And importantly, they leave a strong legacy, not just of performance, but also in the lives they touch. Let's move to the left. People-pleasing leadership, we'll call this, or service for self. Outward behavior of servanthood, but very self-focused. This is a challenge. A lot of times people behave in an outward manner of serving others, but with the weakness of needing to serve their own selfish needs. Saying yes to too many priorities, avoiding conflict, being resentful when others don't give you the praise. In essence, filling a hole that's inside of them. Let's go down into the lower left-hand region, the opposite of authentic leadership. I'll call this counterfeit leadership, power for self. These people are bent on accumulation of power. They often use fear as a motivator for their own ends. And I would suggest to you that this kind of leadership, while it may feel large when they're in your presence, is actually very, very small and self-limiting, and I think is bound to ultimately collapse. People can usually smell this type of leader for who they really are and who's number one and what it's all about. They'll put their political career and career gains above everything else and overshadow others and steal the limelight. Even sometimes, and unfortunately we see it in our society now, dramatically abusing power. A famous quote that's been stated many times by Lord Acton, a British historian and parliamentarian at the turn of the 1800s, once quipped, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Be careful about these leaders." And finally, quadrant four, as we move over, I'll call authoritarian leadership, power for a purpose. And this is unique because these are leaders that wield power and authority for the benefit of others. They will make hard decisions for the good of the organization, but they tend to hold on to those decisions as well because they want to be in control. They may not delegate. They maybe have a fear of the loss of power, maybe not focused on people development as much as they should be either, for a desire to remain in charge, and may ultimately get too comfortable with the trappings of power and authority. Now, you may look at this, and your tendency, like mine, could be, okay, good, now I can label leaders. And, you raise your hand and say, I'm an authentic leader. And to begin to place people in quadrants. I actually don't think that's the way we should use it. I think we should actually think about it as a diagnostic tool and to recognize that all of us probably exhibit behaviors that could fall into any of these quadrants at any given moment. Situations, decisions, certain contexts can bring that out. And there's a quote that I'd like you to think about that helps us consider this, because we do all have a tendency towards self-protection or self-promotion. And it comes from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'm kind of digging his beard this morning. I don't know about you guys. He was a Russian historian, novelist. He was a critic of communism. In fact, his criticism landed him up into the Gulag as a dissident. And he said this, and I think it's important for us to consider, and we'll be up on the screen there. If only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? What I'd like to suggest to you is the hard work of leadership starts in an inside-out kind of way, dealing with your purposes and your motives and your intentions. And if you want to be a servant, if you want to be other-focused, you've got to start there. And you know, one thing I've learned in my time in leadership is crisis has a beautiful way of bringing that out. A mentor of mine, Alan Clark, used to say, "Young Crenshaw, adversity doesn't build character, but it only reveals it." And I found that to be true. When you're not meeting goals, when there's a major organizational change where you've got to remove a leader from a role, when there's discord over objectives or values, it'll show out in your life and determine, are you going to hang out in Quadrant 1 and be an authentic leader focused on others and being a servant, or are you going to go someplace else? So leadership is inside out, but servanthood is upside down. And I would suggest to you, you've got to cause yourself to think in that way. So I'd like to close by giving you a little charge, and we're going to use the word REAL as an acronym. Get real. REAL stands for reflect, expect, assess, and then listen and learn. Let's start with reflect. It's my belief that a good leader, an authentic leader, spends time reflecting on who they are. As I've stated, it's an inside-out venture. Keep your heart with all vigilance, the proverb says, for from it flows the springs of life. If you aren't doing the work to carve time out to reflect on your behaviors and to reflect on your impact on others, you may be missing a lot. One little tip that I have is I ask my assistants to help me with that, because my schedule gets so busy at times, so packed, I'll carve some time out. And I have a little acronym that I use, RPR. It stands for reflect, prepare, and roam. Because I need time to reflect on my own leadership, prepare for what's ahead, and sometimes just walk around and be with people. R is for reflect. E is for expect. Now you may say, he's probably going to say, expect really great things. What I'm going to tell you is expect successes and expect failures in yourself and in others. We all want to be authentic leaders, but the facts are it's not a straight line. And if you're like me, maybe you prize efficiency and productivity, but you've got to be careful, because sometimes the slow way is the fast way. And being present when things go wrong in a good way with your people can make a big difference. When things go right, give praise liberally. If they go wrong, look in the mirror. Put yourself in a place to respond well to conflict and things when they aren't as they'd like to be. A stands for assess. So reflect, expect, and assess. And here, it's not you should be assessing your people, but allow your people to assess you. Allow them to do that regularly, to give you feedback. Do it formally. I just had my performance review with Young Life with 4 board members. The board chair administered it, and a big piece of it was what others are saying about me inside the organization, my subordinates, if you will. And what's important as you think about assessing yourself is this. Don't just assess your intentions, what you'd like to think about your leadership, but ensure that you're assessing your impact on others, and they can give you that feedback. Own the impact, not just your intentions. Authentic leaders go beyond just what their purposes were and own how their leadership, decisions, behaviors, etc., land on those in their organization. And finally, L is for listen and learn. By listening to your people, understanding who they are, what motivates them, what drives them, what their fears are, you learn to become a better servant who leads. they'll experience your leadership as authentic and for them. And I would say to you, be a courageous listener. Be somebody who can hear the hard stuff, even deal with criticism with an evenness of mind. And when you do, you'll engender trust in your organization. And trust has an amazing way of creating transparency where people want to tell you what's really going on. And the truth gets out that way. And then as a leader, you're not dealing with half-truths, cover-ups, or false data. So I'm going to close with this. It was about 2009. I had my first opportunity to interact with Edge. Jeff Simmons, a founder, asked me to sit in with 9 of the first mentors who began this organization. And it happened to be right at the time I was battling cancer. I was diagnosed with cancer in 2009 and had been through chemotherapy and was just on the back end of recovering from that. And I remember, Jeff and I were just even reflecting this morning and last evening, I remember exactly where I was when we had that call. And I also remember something else very deeply that I felt like God spoke to me. That my mission moving forward was not to try to figure my life out and peer around corners and plan and make it all happen, but rather to do this simply, and I leave it with you. Serve well those whom I give you, the Lord said to me. And I would tell you, if you would do that with all your heart, you can change history, one by one young person, one professional at a time. Serve well those whom the Lord gives you. Thanks for being here, and God bless you all.